Hi, everybody. Um, that's me. Hi, everybody. This is Stacey Berlow. Great to be here. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you guys. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a managing partner in Project Balance, and I've been doing software development for over 15 years. And I'm an engineer by training, and we do all sorts of software applications, data capture applications, and so on. We work with open source applications and mobile apps. So we've done a lot in the area of software development and maintenance, and that is me. That is actually what I look like, but I am wearing glasses today. So when you think about maintenance, we have this idea, we're going to start with something like this. For those who don't know, Bugatti is a very expensive car. And if you don't do maintenance, you don't think about it, you might end up with something like this. So maintenance and sustainability are tied very closely together. And I wanted to talk about this today because I think that there's a gap in understanding what it takes to do maintenance and how maintenance and sustainability are tied together. And I think that what's happening in terms, at least from our perspective as a software vendor, is that what's going on or what's happening is not working very well. And my goal for the presentation is to discuss important aspects of software maintenance and exchange ideas. So we don't have a lot of people on today, which is in some ways it's great. Please feel free to pipe in and ask questions or type in your questions. I want this to be interactive. I know it's a webinar, which makes it a little unusual, but really the idea here is to have an exchange of ideas and really kind of thrash out what this is about. So I'm going to go over the kinds of software maintenance, what's needed to build sustainability into products, cost, which is a big discussion point, and then some ideas for sustainability. So this diagram here kind of encapsulates both the maintenance types and activities. So you've got corrective, adaptive, preventive, and perfective. Those are the kinds of maintenance types there are. And we also, the activities around that is monitoring an application, enhancing an application, supporting it, and fixing defects. And so I'm going to go over each one of these separately and give you examples. Oh, I won't need this. I won't need this. So corrective is defect fixing. And one thing to note is that for maintenance, it's after you've deployed your software application. So all of this discussion is you've done your deployment, either you've deployed it to the cloud or you've deployed it to individual facilities, whatever that looks like, and this is post-deployment. And typically, corrective action or defect fixing happens almost immediately after you deploy. You typically will find those defects that you weren't able to find during software development almost immediately after. And sorry, I'm trying to get and here's some examples. So you might find that, you might find that your user interface, something's not right with that. Your navigation isn't running or a control isn't working. So in this example, the one on the left is the gender-based violence information management system from World Vision. Here's an example where the left and right hand arrows are available, and you can't actually go to a different month. Here's an example where if you clicked on something, you get a 404 error. 404, you can't actually find that page. Another example would be data entry doesn't save an expected value. An example of that would be, let's say a particular somebody's name has an an apostrophe in it or some kind of special character. And you can't save a field on the form because of a problem with that, and you didn't expect that, or you didn't test that during the development. Here's an example where a page doesn't render correctly. This Well Beyond Care is a piece of software that is a consumer piece of software. It's working, but it doesn't display correctly. We didn't know that until after it was deployed. And then here's another example where specifically it's a Chrome example, and it's rendering fine on one particular kind of browser, but not on another. Another kind of corrective action or defect you might find right after deployment would be login problems. Here is Well Beyond Care. There's some kind of login problem giving an error, or some kind of login problem. This is the JOP project where this is for food safety in Ethiopia. So those are the kinds of, and everybody pretty well knows what a defect is. And in maintenance, you would correct defects. This next type, adaptive, is an impact on your software from outside your software. So something has changed outside of your software. For example, a web browser has updated. We found that Chrome had done an update, and we weren't able to render something. In this case, this is a dashboard. MS Edge, which is for Windows 10, didn't render this correctly. We got this unexpected error, but it was working fine on Internet Explorer 11. Another kind of impact that's from outside would be like an operating system change or a framework change. Microsoft recently upgraded their .NET framework, and if you have a Microsoft-based application, it very often will use this, and they had updated this for security reasons, and this is an example of Dwolla, which is a third-party application used for putting money in people's accounts. They basically said, you need to upgrade your .NET, your application, or else this might not work. And so this gentleman said he's sorry to report that over the last 48 hours, they found this problem and we had to fix it. Another kind of adaptive maintenance, which you guys probably have seen, is you have a map display, and the country decides to split a region or change their districts. And now your map doesn't display correctly, your select lists, which has a select list of districts, is now incorrect, and you have to make a fix. Preventive kind of maintenance is kind of looks forward and helps you prevent a problem. We have a client called Children's Rosary, and they started, it's a WordPress site, and they started small. Now they've got thousands of people looking at their website, and they decided to move from an 8 gigabyte memory on an older server to a newer server, and now they've got tons and tons of capacity. They're kind of preventing a problem in the future. Another thing that, as part of preventive, is to install something called an uptime robot, or some kind of piece of software which basically checks the URL. It's as though you typed in the URL and verified that the software came up. It checks on a periodic basis. You set that. It could check every minute. It could check every 5 minutes, and so on. And we do this to check almost all our applications that are ongoing. And if it goes down, we get a notification. And then, like in the case of Well Beyond Care, which is a 24/7 consumer application, we actually get a notification for that on our cell phones, because we have to very quickly figure out what's going on with that application. Another kind of preventive is query optimization. If you know that the number of records is going to grow, you will spend time optimizing your queries so that they come back quickly, they don't hang, and so on. And the last is perfective. This is all about user feedback, and this really goes to enhancements. So invariably, after if the software is successful, after you've deployed it, people will come back with requests. And here's an example of an enhancement list and the kinds of enhancements, and it was approved and so on. And what we tend to do is lump those things together and create small projects with enhancements. But that is definitely part of maintenance. Another kind of perfective is when things are too slow. This is preventive, but it's also a perfective. So this worked. This display for Well Beyond Care worked just fine. It just was getting too slow. Text on buttons sometimes are not right. So you develop something with users in mind, and then you get feedback from the users that, I don't know where to click. I didn't see that button. It's not displaying correctly. That's perfective maintenance. In 1977, there was a study by Lenz and Burton, and they looked at 487 IT organizations, and they found, on average, development and system staff spent half of their time on maintenance. So we tend to think that most of the time is on the initial development, but actually at least half of the time is on maintenance. Now, these IT organizations are companies that have IT staff, IT departments, and they are not only developing new things, but they're also developing, they're also maintaining the existing software. And the larger the company, the more that was spent on maintenance. And what's interesting about this is, and I will show you this a bit more and in the next slide, 21% corrective, so defect fixing, 23% adaptive, that's support for things that happen to your software that's out of your control. 50% of your maintenance time is on enhancements, and 3% on other. They had other. And of that, emergency defect fixes, routine debugging, changes to input data and files, changes to hardware for adaptive, customer enhancements, improvements to documentation, optimization, perfective. This just to give you, I guess one of the things I want to emphasize is it's not just defect fixing. And what we have a tendency to think about when we talk about maintenance and think about maintenance is just, oh, well, when something breaks, that's maintenance. It's more than that. Now, Lenz and Burton also found a bunch of other things, and I'm going to go through them here, and then we're going to go through them in more detail because they have an impact on what you might do in the future for yourselves. Poor quality documentation is a maintenance problem, particularly if you have a development, you've created some software and you've developed some software, and if you haven't documented it well, when either the maintenance team takes over or those same developers, they're not working on it every day, all day, it's very often they have to think, what was that for? How do we do that? And so if it's not well documented, it takes time. Excessive demand for customer changes, competing demands on maintenance personnel, difficulty meeting schedules, inadequate training for users, and turnover. I'm going to go through these. One thing that when I read this article, I thought, wow, things really haven't changed that much since 1977 and 2018. So what does that mean for us? I mean, ultimately, you need skilled human resources and funding resources to be able to have successful ongoing maintenance. So one of the things on poor quality application system development documentation, I don't know if anybody, as a software person, I've seen this image. I don't know if you've seen. So this is how the customer explains it, how the project leader understood it, how the engineer designed it, how the programmer wrote it, how the sales executive described it, something fantastic. You've got a barca lounger on a tree. How the project was documented, and so on. And this is really what the customer really needed. And so one of the things that I want to say about documentation is that, and one suggestion is that when you put your RFPs out for software development, to make sure that you have, as a line item, as a deliverable, software documentation, including the administrator documentation, not just the end user documentation. And the thing about documentation, it's one of the first things to fall by the wayside. Either there's not enough, or there's barely enough funding to do the software itself, so you'll skimp on that, or you'll do some documentation, but then you won't necessarily loop back to the end of the project and actually update it so that it can be used for maintenance. So as a program, from a program perspective, making sure that documentation is in your RFP as a line item, and then managing it so that the documentation is up to date at the end of the project. The demand for customer changes it really depends on the organization and how this is handled. If you have software development resources as part of your organization, sometimes what happens is individuals from the program or from a particular business unit, they'll go directly to the software developers and ask for changes. And the developer very often wants to please that person and will do it. And sometimes that's fine, but it's not very efficient. So what we suggest for customer, and these are under the kind of would be enhancements, is to collect them, organize them, and make sure that there's one point of contact for approval for them. Don't let users talk directly to the developer. And if so, make sure that the developer collects that and has a discussion about it. And then we suggest that you prioritize your enhancements and bundle them into what we call mini projects. That's what we did for GBV. Was that slide before showed a whole bunch of enhancements. They were bundled. We could do them more efficiently, and the software teams will be able to do them more efficiently that way. One of the things that does happen with maintenance is competing time. So sometimes a developer in an organization, they're on a development project, and so they're first and foremost they have deliverables that are due, and then something will happen and there'll be a maintenance item, and so those people will either have to work overtime or they're going to have to put their development project to the side. And as a requester for maintenance, that you just have to be aware that that's happening, that it wasn't like there's a person sitting there waiting to take that request, unless you're actually paying for somebody to do that. And in some cases, some organizations do that. They have somebody at the waiting for in case something happens. Mostly that doesn't happen. Another comment I want to make here that we've seen is if you have software developers in country that are on the development team, and they're part of a larger team, what sometimes we find is that in-country person is also tapped to do many other things like fix people's computers, deploy software on people's computers, go to the Ministry of Health, do end user training, and they get distracted from the development process that they're supposed to be doing, or their maintenance activities. So those are just to be aware that in-country developers very often get tapped to do much more than that, and they can't meet schedules. And this last slide, inadequate training for user personnel and turnover for user organization is an ongoing and difficult. It's actually quite difficult because you're constantly training and training and training. And the key here is to expect that that's going to happen and put something in place to continually have end user training, whether that is PowerPoint presentations or every last Thursday of the month, we're going to have GBV training, or we're going to have IQ Care training, or we're going to have, we're going to have the application training, whether there's one person or there's 10 people, and people know that you will be on, somebody from the organization will be on and will be doing training, and will be then also discussing any defects that they might have or problems that they might have. That's worked really very, very well for us in the past. Any questions before I start into costs? No. Okay, cool. So now we get into the cost discussion, which can be a difficult discussion to have. Because the cost of maintenance is typically a lot higher than one expects. And it's also difficult to estimate, so there's no easy way to estimate it. There's no industry standard for estimating it. And there's actually no real agreement on what the percentage of the maintenance, or what the cost of the original build. So if I spent $10,000 on a piece of software, how much of that would be, percentage would be allocated to maintenance year in, year out? And so what we do find is when we discuss that, we oftentimes find that program managers have what I call sticker shock. They're really, really surprised. And the reason for it is because it's not just defect fixing. And it goes through the entire span of the program. Some factors that affect pricing: what are your goals of the maintenance? Is it just defect fixing, or is this going to be a phased approach? You have phase one, where you're getting the most important aspects of data collection, and then phase two will be an enhancement phase, where you'll add more forms and more reports, and phase three might be a dashboard. That will be a different trajectory than we have a mature product, defects have been fixed, long fixed, we're not planning to enhance it. All we need to do is break fix, and if there is some kind of impact from an outside third party piece of software, then we'll deal with it. Budget and service level agreement will have an impact on how much it'll cost you for maintenance. So if you want the service level to be, as soon as I find a problem, I will fix it. I have to be careful. I will identify what that problem is immediately within a certain amount of time. We may not know how to fix it in that amount. We'll find it, we'll figure out how to fix it, but we may not be able to fix it in that amount of time. Sometimes fixes take days, or it takes a period of testing and refixing and testing. So like that .NET update, it was fixed over a period of 3 weeks. We did an update, we thought we got it all. We tested everything. Then the third-party vendor came back and said, oh, we've noticed you have problems. And they showed us. And we had to then go back, fix those things, retest those things, and then we went back to them and said, do you see any more? And they said no. So the service level agreement will address how quickly will you respond to acknowledge the defect, how quickly will you come up with a solution for the defect, and then how quickly will you be able to actually fix that defect? How many resources will you apply to fixing that defect? And it really depends on how critical your software is and how people use it. If it's your banking software and it's an airline software, that those guys they're putting everything aside and they're running after that. If it's a reporting piece of software that happens, once a quarter, you don't necessarily need to have it fixed quickly. Although in some cases those problems get highlighted during those critical reporting times, and you do have to do quickly. And the last item here, really, that the team and the skill level goes to who is going to be doing your maintenance. So very often in international development, there's this idea that I'm going to hand the maintenance off to a ministry or a set of folks in another organization, and they may or may not be able to do it. And the pricing for that, or the time and effort for the maintenance, may be completely different than if you hired the development team that actually had created it. One last thing idea to convey is when there is maintenance that's activities, it's not just a developer. A business analyst will need to come in and figure out, is this a defect? If this is a defect, what is it impacting? Is it impacting just this one thing, or is it across the whole application? So there's an enumeration of where the problem is happening, how severe. Then the developer will figure out, okay, how am I going to fix it? How are we going to fix it? Then there's a tester to test all the places and do regression testing for the one thing or the entire application, which may or may not take time. And then you need to manage those people. You need to manage the program manager, the end client, keep them involved, have them help with the testing, articulate the problem. So you actually have at least 4 people involved, and that will also contribute to the cost. This is really a discussion about open source. So when you write software, the more third-party components you put together, probably the faster you can write a piece of software. If you put a bunch of components together that are already written, so for example, WordPress, really good example. You can load WordPress, you can get all sorts of pre-written third-party components, features, and very quickly put together an application. If WordPress or the underlying WordPress is updated, then the cost, you have to go to all your components and test them all, do the update, test them all, and then you may have to fix all the components that touch that update. So third-party components is important, and because you really don't have a lot of oversight over them. Upgrading operating systems, the growth in the number of users, and then the original requirements. So if the original requirements were well done and the software really does address what it was meant to do, great. Sometimes if the original requirements are not correct or something was missed, then it could increase the cost of maintenance. And a side comment about open source, it doesn't mean free. So there is this idea that, let's use an open source component. Open source means that the software code is available for you to load and branch. So software like DHIS2, OpenMRS, OpenHIE, Drupal, WordPress, these are all open source. You can download it, you can use it, you can branch it, you can enhance it. Often it's not very well supported. There's not a lot of documentation, so it will take a developer. In some ways, you need a more highly skilled developer to work with open source than some other software that is that's maintained by that you purchase, like Microsoft products and so on. So if you it's a cost trade-off. It really is. And I know there's a very, very big push in the international development sector to use open source and to share. And I applaud that. I think it's great. And I just think that you need to understand that it's not free, and that when you go to download DHIS2, you have to know how to configure it, and you have to know the nuances of it, and it's not terribly easy. There is documentation and there's a community, but it will take your developers quite a lot of time if they've never worked with it. There's a pretty large learning curve. Most of these, there's a large learning curve. And so there's a trade-off. Any questions about cost? I know this is this is an interesting. Very often it costs more money than expected. And if you have a development project and you've spent X and you say, well, it's going to be between, those other folks said anywhere between 40% and 80%. That's a lot more than one would expect. So, and we that's what they suggest. I would say that most development projects spend a lot less. And they, I think I think it can be difficult at times, actually, because, there's not enough funding. Well, we're going to get into the funding part and the sustainability. So any questions on cost? No? Everybody's very quiet. So these are my ideas, and I hope everybody will pipe in. So one of the questions is, how do we ensure that there is funding for sustainability and maintainability in the nonprofit and development agency space? One idea, and one thing we try to suggest, is during the RFP process. So you're an international development firm, you're going to be going after a large respond to a large opportunity. Think about upfront what kind of electronic tools would be needed to support it, and engage a partner, either your own software development team, if you have one in your organization, involve them, and have a line item in the RFP for the software development itself, and then for the ongoing development. Sometimes we find that that's thought about secondarily, and then funding is scraped together and it doesn't quite cover it, and there's some disappointment in what can be delivered. If needed, my suggestion, this is the scale, is to scale down if needed, so that whatever you do create upfront can be sustained. At the start of a project, when you are creating your M&E program in particular, your data entry forms, your hard copy forms, I really highly suggest that you bring in your IT folks, your organizational IT folks, to help and to be part of that process. We find that very often the forms are already done, and when we go to look at them, sometimes the data is not there for reporting. So one of the processes is to kind of go backwards, look at the reporting and verify that, yeah, you're collecting the data in the way you need it in order to be able to report. As well, kind of in parallel, you can create your forms, hard copy forms, as well as start to think about the database right up front. So the electronic and the hard copy kind of happening in parallel or close to in parallel. And so I ask, how can vendors help make technology, the technology piece, more of an integral part of the program development process? Very often we're brought in afterwards. And I understand, because very often the first year or year and a half, you're just trying to sort that out. And there's a lot of players from a lot of different places trying to figure out what data should be collected. Have somebody sit on your team that's a database that knows databases. Just looking at my notes. The next slide is something about the transition. We see that there's this idea that a vendor is brought in to develop the software, and then there's training, and there's end user training, and there's administrative training or technical training with an IT group that's going to maintain the software. Remember, they haven't been involved in it. They really don't. They themselves have to go through a full learning curve in terms of understanding how the software works, understanding how to query the database. They may or may not have the right skills. And what we suggest is everything from, during the software development phase, when there's a weekly meeting and the program participants are there, that the ministry or whoever is going to take over, even if it might be the IT department of the international development organization, that they sit on that team. We have also suggested that like a Ministry of Health, for example, that they actually, quote unquote, donate a developer or two to sit and be part of the development team. So we would set up their machines. They would have to pay for that, theoretically, but we would help them with their development environment. We would help. They have to be programmers too. The suggestion is programmers from the ministry or programmers from whoever is going to be the maintenance organization. They are actually sitting as programmers on the team, and they are doing programming. Even if they're not as highly skilled, they will learn, they will understand the interactions, they will see how it works. They will then be able to own that piece of software and be able to maintain it once it transfers. The earlier you can do this, the better.
Stacey, can you give an example? For example, maybe you can take the GBVMIS, because I know that that handover was to the National Institute of Statistics for Zambia.
Yeah, right. So that's a really good example. So the software was deployed, and they wanted to be able to. It started out, well, they wanted to be able to put the next facility to actually deploy it at the next facility. And to do that, we created a little download package. And each one of those was specific to that facility. So we trained them how to do that, and they were able to do that. And then there was a whole maintenance. It was like we basically did a mini maintenance. We did a mini project. So after it was deployed, there was one large enhancement. There was a security enhancement. So the original requirements had a very won't say open security, but it had a different philosophy that everybody should be able to see everybody's, and that there should be a lot of sharing. When the ministry got their hands on it, they said, no, no, no. The ministry should see everybody's, but World Vision should only see World Vision's, and I don't know who else. There was another organization should see their organization, so their facilities. So if I'm a um, subgroup ABC, I should, and I'm over 4 facilities, I should only see those 4 facilities. I shouldn't see World Vision, the facility World Vision's overseas for that program. And so we had a very large retrofit where every single page, every report, everything had to be retrofit um, with this new security model. It was fine, but that was an example of the requirements changed, um, and that became a major enhancement. And then along the way, there was we did some perfecting on the reports. Reports were too slow as there was more and more and more records. When you clicked on something, when you clicked on the report, it hung. So now we created a weekly. There was a weekly automated report run and a page for the intake form, which has loads and loads and loads of data. And so that was created. There were some changes in the forms. And so that was a mini project. And in that enhancement, and that was over a period of 6 months, during that time, we had the Ministry of the Central Statistics Office. Those folks on those calls every week, we gave them assignments. We really started to integrate them in all the things that we could do, and we showed them, and we shared screens and all of that stuff, and they were able to take it over. And that piece of software is still up and running and being used, not as much as I can see when the last time some of those facilities are using them actively and some of them are not. There's that program completed, and there's a new round of funding that's coming in, and I'm sure they'll get back to using that. So, one of the things, this question here, why are donors reluctant to cover this area, and instead they want to support the next thing? I had a discussion this morning with a client where somebody said, we always prototype things. Let's prototype this new telephone app in this small area, and then they do it, and then it's left behind, and there's nobody to maintain it. It's a combination of involving and thinking about tools much earlier, and then staying with it. So having it in the RFP, starting it earlier, involving the maintainers earlier as part of the stakeholders, and actually maintaining it throughout the whole program, enhancing and maintaining throughout the program, and then there will really be something that's a good leave behind. Very often, by the time we actually deploy something, we're 6 months to the end, and it's very difficult to actually do a transfer, a handover. One more slide, and then I really do want to have people comment. I had some discussions with program managers, and these were some of the comments. For many programs, there's a mismatch in needs. So the ministry, whatever that Ministry of Gender, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, they think there's a particular need, and you come in, the United States government comes in and says, we really want to do this, we think you need this, and there's maybe a mismatch. So buy-in is required from the ministry. And if they don't have buy-in, when there's a leave behind, they're not necessarily going to be able to maintain it or want to. Work done for international programs is often in addition to people's primary jobs. So you've got a software developer, or you've got a network person who's overseeing a whole bunch of stuff for this ministry or that, and now they have another thing they have to do. And they may or may not want to. That processes really must be integrated into existing systems as much as possible. If they're integrated into something existing that's just an enhancement, it's not as big a stretch. and there must be a slow transition starting early in the program. That was a comment. And Krista Bywaters from World Vision, she worked with us on the GBV, and she said our job is to put ourselves out of work. So as a software development team, really what we want to do, and you guys do this on a program basis, you train the people to run the program and continue it. Even from the software side as well, we want to do exactly the same thing in parallel so that when we exit, somebody is going to actually be able to maintain it and enhance it. So I want to hear from you guys and let's have a discussion. What can program manager and software teams do to help resolve this challenge? You know, I just one more thing and I'll stop talking. About 2 years ago, Measure Evaluation had done a study on dashboards, and our team does a lot of dashboards, and they found that almost every single dashboard project failed. Why? To actually maintain a dashboard requires a lot of ongoing maintenance. Your data has to continue to be cleaned. You have to monitor. You have to make sure that the data going in is right. You have to monitor that the data being cleaned is right. You have to, I mean, there's many things. Dashboards are actually quite complicated. And people and programs spent a lot of money to get data into these dashboards. But they, in my opinion, if they're not used, they failed. And, you know, as developers, when we see things that just don't get used, we get very sad. And we want to enhance the skills of our IT colleagues, and we want the programs themselves to be able to run on their own. So any questions have come up?
Unwritten.
Oh, come on, you guys. What kind of problems have you experienced in your own programs, and what has worked for you? Any suggestions that you can share with the folks that...
Hi, this is Marissa. I'm calling in from the Hunger Project. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing this. I've been kind of working in some software maintenance unintentionally, and just looking at software solutions for our organization. And I think what you've shared really reflects the experience that I've had. So I don't know if I have as much of a question, because I think we're still trying to figure it out, but our situation is a lot about just trying to figure out how to maintain something. Like we built out something at a low cost, and then have really struggled to find the right spot of like how much budget to put towards maintenance and who should do it and how much time is needed. And I don't think we've hit the right balance of that yet. Yeah.
It is.
Continue.
I would say it is project by project for sure. And I think also working with your IT group to find out, who's available, what skills, and to try to come up with scenarios like, if this happens, what will we do? And if it's with a vendor, putting together a framework of if this happens, and what we do is we actually work with the customer to try to put that framework of various scenarios, because how quickly do you have to respond to a problem is one thing, and then if it's a small problem, maybe it's within the maintenance contract, but if you find that, oh, this is a big problem because .NET changed, it was something that was really outside of your control, then very often we'll then say, this is how much we think it'll cost, or you have to put it out to bid. So it is sort of project by project, and looking at required service levels. How quickly do you need to respond? How critical is the software? If you're using it every day, all day, it becomes critical. And then who in your organization does your organization have those skills? Can they learn those skills? Typically that'll be a less expensive It might be. It depends. It depends on your organization, um, because it's not a full-time job unless you have a lot of enhancements. So we have done things where it becomes a full-time job. We actually have a full-time employee or a full-time equivalent doing enhancements, and then we have a small bit of a tester, a small bit of a project manager, a small bit of a business analyst, and you actually are paying for a full-time equivalent. Um, and it can go the spectrum. Um, it's difficult. Another idea is if you can bundle more than one project, that is also something that will work as well. So you have 3, 4 apps, and you hire a vendor to um, monitor them, and then if there's enough work and enough enhancements, then you might be able to have a slice of time of somebody's. In the end, for the human resources, it comes time down to, how much of a full-time equivalent is it, half time, and then if it is half time, how do they prioritize their time? Do they prioritize their time with client one or client two? That's what we try to figure out. And so, um, So my suggestion is to try to figure out the scenarios and look at your human and funding resources to figure out who would do it and what the response would need to be, and that will help you figure things out.
Thank you. Yeah.
Other questions, other experiences, and maybe there are positive experiences that where you've been able to maintain the software. For things like Microsoft, your Outlook and this and that, you guys, we all pay for that. We actually pay for the support, and those things are there. You don't necessarily see them because your organization is paying for them, but you are paying for the support, and in some way, or if it's a software as a service, that monthly amount is paying for the support. And sometimes, by the way, that is less expensive than actually doing it yourself. So, sometimes, although, you might go with an open source piece of software where it's free to download it, but then that ongoing support is not free. So, the thing about software as a service is they will support the software for you, and that is becoming more and more. There are more options out there, and that's becoming more of a possibility. And I also think an option that my perception, and I don't know if this is true, is that for international development, even though there's an ongoing cost, it's something that it isn't being entertained as a lower cost option. The challenge is when the program ends, and now, this has always been the challenge. The program ends, and now you have a software as a service. Who's going to pay that bill? And if it's being used by the ministry, then they're going to have to pay that bill. And GBV is a really good example. They're using a cloud. So their application is on a cloud, and it's not very much money, really. It's like $80 a month, and you need a credit card, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, we should buy a server, house it in the Ministry of Gender or the Central Statistics Office. And in addition to that server, you need now good internet, and you need good internet, because it's a 24/7. Okay, so people need it every day, and you need to monitor that server. And if that's down, you need a person to then try to fix it. and understand what to do. That's outside of the actual application itself. And so loads and loads and loads of discussion about this, because the prior model was you buy the server, you leave it as a leave behind because it doesn't have any residual cost. But that's just not really true, really. And so after a lot of discussion and time running out, it ended up on the cloud, which is far more secure. They're also worried about security, but there's nothing stopping if you have a server at somebody's cube at the central statistics office. It's not under lock and key, and anybody can open it up and start to look. That's not really secure. Really, it's not more secure for sure. And then there's the security patches on operating systems that happen all the time, which need to be applied. So if you do software as a service, they're going to be doing that. And so in the end, after a lot of cajoling, it ended up staying on the cloud, and they're paying for it.
Just to give a bit of perspective of the project that
Yes.
Stacey is talking, it's a project that was created a big hype. It was a GBV MIS system at the national level for Zambia, which we were all excited to work on at World Vision, but also many other partners, UK, USAID, yes. Several other partners that were involved. And because everything was so central to the software, so it was creating a management system basically for GBV at a country level. The sustainability of it was more complicating than just what you would write on a proposal where you are like, and we hand it over to the government. And that's essentially what ours said. So we focus a lot on on the relationships with the local government, or the yes. National Statistics Institute being part of the entire, from the development of the software all the way through, with the idea of the handover. But the thinking was the handover would have been almost like a handshake, where you finish the project, you shake hands with partners, and you leave behind the software without all of these other considerations of what actually there is so much more on the maintenance and the costs for paying those maintenance all the time, or even things like, well, if it needs a payment for credit card,
the whole credit card was funny.
Who has the credit card and whose authority it's going to be? Like even the little things that are not a big thing to think of, and definitely there is a solution, but ends up in hours of discussion, as Stacey was saying. So this is how, from my end, I deal with a lot of issues of sustainability. I had always looked at more from the programmatic sustainability, and software sustainability, especially if they are core part of what you are trying to sustain in terms of outcome, became a new headache.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's a process. It really is a process. Yeah. Any other questions? Any comments? Any other comments from the folks that are still on?
Hi, this is Amy Crumbliss from the American Red Cross. And I had a kind of a success story.
Oh, good. Oh, yay. I want to hear that.
So you were talking about dashboards, and we recently, well, probably about a year ago, started using a dashboarding app, and it's actually been really successful. We do have the good fortune of having permanent full-time application development and maintenance folks on staff. So we do have people that is their job, but we were able to find a dashboard application that, while we do pay for it, it's pretty easy to use, and there's a lot of we have great support from them, and there's just a lot of information out there and trainings. So it's not just this one team that uses it. There are sort of people in all of our teams that have taken the time and the trainings and learned how this dashboarding service works. So it's not just, this technical team that owns it. It's sort of the programs also feel like they've got a stake in it, because someone is embedded in all of the teams. And so I think that's been successful, because we've sort of bridged that gap where we can make sure that the dashboards do meet the needs of the programs, because we have someone who actually sits with the programs, who understands the dashboards,
Yes.
and has the license and the ability to go in and make those changes and say, oh, we are going to add a component here for our dashboard because management's interested in seeing this. So you don't have to go through that that one team to get any of those changes made. And then also, we've been able to integrate the use of this dashboard into other processes. So we do, for example, quarterly review meetings, and so leadership is totally on board with the dashboard, and they have said, we'll use the dashboard during the review meetings. So if we need this data to know how the programs are doing, and how we see the data is through the dashboard. So, right, you need to make sure the data is there, it's visual, it makes sense. That's what we'll be looking at. So I think having, people embedded in the programs that understand it, having obviously the dedicated people, the technical team, having leadership so on board and supportive of it, and then integrating it with ongoing processes. We've been pretty successful so far on getting everybody used to using the dashboard.
Fabulous. I'm taking note of that. That's great.
Yeah, so it's been good. And we do use Salesforce, and so it's connected there too. So just establishing all kinds of connections that are logical and efficient wherever they exist.
Yeah.
And making sure those are reinforcing each other.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. I'm smiling over here. That's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, I recognize that we're actually over time at this point, but thanks, Amy, for sharing that success story. It's definitely good to hear. I know that some of you might need to log off now, but I just want to open it up, so long as Stacey is still here and available, and there's still interest to keep conversation going. If anyone has any thoughts to share, comments, questions, etc. And if not, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
We can call it quits. If something does come up, you have a question or anything to share, Stacey has offered to respond offline.
You can find me at sberlow@projectbalance.com. Lynette Burrows is business partner. She's also available.
Yeah. So if something comes up later that you didn't think of during this time. Yeah, please do. And so thank you to Stacey for doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to you all too for coming in and taking part and listening in and all that. Hope you learned a bit. And I think this is a good session to have right on the eve of Merle Tech. So,
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your time. Loved
Thanks
it.
all.
Thank you.